All right, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today on this webinar with Metric Insights, looking at our latest updates in the product that we're going to get into. My name is Mike Smitheman. I've spoken to a lot of the audience before with Marius, who's with me today. Hi, Marius.
Hello, Mike. Hi, everyone.
So some, the usual housekeeping items. So obviously lines are muted with the big audience that we have, but happy to take questions in the Q&A window as we go through this. We'll keep an eye on that as we're presenting, and if need be, we'll leave some time at the end to answer any outstanding questions. Obviously, this is being recorded on the BrightTalk platform, so you can always access that through our channel on BrightTalk, but also I know we'll send out a recording to the registrants after the event today. So generally, the topic for today is we're going to basically take a look back over the past sort of 12 months at the releases that we've done with the product. And really focus on sort of some of the key features that we've added. And you're going to see a big sort of theme around that has been around how do we better govern BI within our organizations, and how do we get better about sort of controlling the content that we're putting out there, making sure it's useful and that users are engaging with it. So a big part of what we're going to look at today is functionality around that, but then I know there's a couple of other features that we're going to touch on. So usual sort of format, we're going to take you through a few slides for each section and then jump into the product and show you some of the demo stuff. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Marius to start.
Thank you, Mike. So kind of to set the stage, we want to talk about the general problem that we've seen with governance. Why are we implementing these governance features? What's important about that? And to understand that, it's helpful to look at just the typical BI lifecycle of an asset. This is pretty much what's present in almost every organization, that irrespective of BI tool, things go through this kind of these stages, right? The first thing happens is analysts build some kind of new report. If we're lucky, if they hit the target, they build something that the business actually wants, then you're going to get initial good usage for that report. It gets published in the BI tool internal catalog. People initially use it, and then over time, the usage typically becomes less and less. For a number of reasons, other visualizations, clutter, a number of things we'll talk about later. Usage drops over time, and then eventually that asset that was created some number of months or years ago, joins the many other assets in your BI environment that are basically just sitting there, cluttering up the environment as users move on and are using other analytics or not using analytics at all. And so you end up building these, almost like an elephant graveyards, if you like, of old obsolete assets that are just sitting there in your BI environments, and it creates really an untenable situation in that new users, people coming into your organization, and they're unfamiliar with what's there. They're trying to figure out what should I use for my business to answer my questions. They're confronted with this mess of duplicative content, reports that are almost duplicates of each other, things that are obsolete, and they've got to navigate that to figure out what is it that's really useful. Perhaps there's an effort maybe once a year or once every few years to clean all that up, but those are very difficult to do, almost always unsuccessful, because it's just way too much of a mess that gets created, and the whole process of publishing content is distributed. So there are lots of different parties that are involved, and so doing the cleanup is very difficult. So this paradigm is clearly broken, and we really believe that there is a much better way, and that is to replace this sort of ad hoc, just publishing, sort of fire and forget type of model of BI with a true BI governance framework, right? One where you are governing the entire life cycle of your asset. So what does that mean? Well, of course, it starts with synchronization. So you can't govern what you have not brought together into a single platform. So there has to be a mechanism by which you can bring in all of your assets, whether they be BI tools across all your different technology stack, or whether we're talking about things that are, user-generated type content, PDFs and PowerPoints and Excels that are being broadly circulated within an organization are being used for decision making. So all the things that kind of putting it all into a single platform is sort of the starting gate that you need to be in. So having those capabilities is very important. But then after that, the next step is really there has to be a publishing process, because in reality, as we just talked about, not everything in your BI platform should be accessible by your users, because there's some things out there that probably are obsolete. And even if they are, the things that are accessible, you want to make sure that they're accessible with the right kind of context. You want metadata to be added to it. You want to have you might want to certify that content. You want to be able to ensure that everything you need to promote data literacy is there, so that you're seeing it. So you don't, instead of that elephant graveyard, you want more of a museum type of experience, right? Think about when you go to a museum, you see that artwork up on the wall, and there's a little plaque that describes, what that artwork's about. Maybe there's something about, who the artist is, gives you context. It gives you an understanding of how you can consume it. That artwork is placed in the exhibit gallery next to other similar artwork from the same artist or a similar theme or some time period, so that you can kind of consume that in a way that provides value for you. You want that same kind of a model to happen with your BI tools, and that's only possible if there is a well thought out, well developed publishing process. Then once that publishing has happened, the next step is to really have monitoring, right? So you need to know, how well did I do? I created this art exhibit. What are people coming to see it? Are people looking at my visualization that I published, or is it something that the business really told me is useful, but in fact is not really that useful to people? And if so, why? Right? So generating not only the monitoring, not only knowing about activity, but answering the question around the why, the feedback, the understanding, how much do people appreciate with the content that I've created, and are there things that they would like to have changed in it to make it more effective? So having the mechanisms to collect that in your BI framework is important. And then feeding that into a continuous update process, right? So as I talked about in the first slide, it simply does not work to think of BI as a fire and forget, as just I'm going to publish it and walk away from it. That just creates a mess. So you have to have a continuous process through which you're reviewing, are these things that have been certified, are they still certified? Is the metadata still correct? Based on the usage that I'm seeing and the feedback I'm getting, should I keep this asset modified, promoted, or deprecated? Right? So having the tools to be able to make that very important. So this is the framework that we feel is very important, that we've seen work within organizations. And if we want to, within Metric Insights, our goal is really to provide a toolkit that enables all of this to happen. And that's what we're going to be talking about in the rest of the presentation. So drilling down kind of in the next level of detail, specific features, we'll be looking at publishing workflows. What have we enabled there? What are we trying to do with metadata? How we support different certification levels, looking at monitoring and feedback capabilities within the platform. And then we'll finish off by looking at some of the usability type improvements around global filters and new data sources that have been added. So let's jump in. So the first thing we'll want to talk about is publishing workflows. So this is, how is it that the content, once we've synced it in, how do we publish it? How do we move it from the place in the portal where it's just being worked on for review into an area where which is ready for the user to be able to consume in a way that generally generates high engagement? So what's important about that as we look at this? What are the characteristics of a successful publishing workflow? Well, it has to handle a few things. First of all, it has to be an agile process, right? So clearly, the way that what you do to publish an asset, if it's something that's highly business critical, very sensitive, something, for example, the deck that's going to be used by your executive to be able to share numbers with the street, right? What your CFO will use to share numbers with the street. That analytic is going to be, it should have a whole lot more scrutiny than maybe the dashboard that's being used by the accounts payables clerk to make sure that you're paying your bills on time, right? There's just a much higher level of impact that will occur associated with making a mistake. So there has to be an agility in the process such that you can adapt to both of those kinds of resources. Then additionally, you have to be able to handle multiple parties in the process in those situations where there are multiple hands involved. So maybe your data governance team needs to be involved for certain assets, the business needs to be involved in certain assets in the whole publishing process to add certain metadata, to certify, and perhaps in all cases the developer of the product is got to be involved in this. So we need to be able to handle all those situations where there's complex number of people involved, as well as those where there's just one person who's involved in the publishing. So that configurability, that customization, that is very important. And that not only applies to who's involved and how many stages are there, but also to what happens in each stage. So I can be able to configure the system so that I can state, well, here are the particular attributes that the developer needs to set, and those might be different from what the data governance team needs to do in the process. And so each person needs to be able to come in and have their specific touches to extend the data to create the final published content. And finally, and I think almost most importantly, it has to require minimal effort. So any kind of publishing workflow or governance process that is onerous, that requires your users to spend a whole lot of time, coming in and doing things, is going to fail because people are very busy. So there has to be a real low touch effort required to make the whole thing work. And that's very important. And you'll see when we look at the features here that's been a key principle of the design. So part of the publishing process is very important is managing metadata. And I want to talk a little bit about what this means, because one of the things that I think is largely oversimplified in the industry is metadata management. We all talk about metadata, everyone appreciates the importance of managing it, but somehow when it comes to actually doing it, most organizations fall short. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of complexity around this particular topic. So, for example, the content itself is not homogeneous. It's not necessarily one set of BI tools in an enterprise that are using it. You might have multiple BI tools. Each of them has its own level of metadata capture. It's captured differently in each tool. And then in addition to the traditional BI tools like the Tableaus, the Power BIs, the Clicks that you have assets in, you largely have in the enterprise a large number of user-generated content. So no matter how hard we try, the truth is our users will always use Excel and PowerPoint and PDFs to combine information, to share it out. These oftentimes are assets that are widely distributed that need to be governed, that need to have metadata associated with them so that you understand what you're consuming when you're looking at that content. So both types of content have to be combined together in the strategy. And then if you look at what's in the metadata store, what you need to capture, there are different kinds of metadata there as well. So you've got user-generated metadata, right? Things like descriptions, documentation, usage notes, maybe ownership information, who on the business side is responsible for this particular visualization and for the business rules that are encapsulated in it. And then you also have more traditional governance type metadata, data governance type metadata. So classification, is this internal or what kind of data is in this visualization? Does it contain PII data? What is the lineage? Where does this information come from? So all that has to also be integrated in so that you can get the full picture. And then if you look at the sources of this information, again, you've got this heterogeneous landscape. Some of this metadata may come from BI tools. You might have certification being done inside of these tools or tagging done for certain key metadata attributes. Other things might live in your data catalog, where you might have a Calibra and Elation and glossary definitions and a lineage and all that lives over there, and you've got to access that. Other things in the user-generated metadata area may be in spreadsheets or in SharePoint lists. And we see this all the time, where the key information about definitions and attributes associated with ownership and things like that are being stored in those areas. Or it may be that these things don't exist anywhere at all, and as part of the publishing process, they have to be manually applied to the data. So to the visualization. So you have to be able to handle all these different sources. And then most importantly, all of this has to be woven together in such a way that at the end of the publishing process, what you have is a content where all of this metadata is present and accessible, right? Because what is the point of doing all that work to capture metadata, to capture glossary definitions, to capture lineage, capture all that inside of a data catalog, but then to hide it away in that catalog and not make it accessible to the end user who's consuming that visualization from a BI tool, right? That makes no sense. You've really wasted all that effort. So it's critically important that no matter where that metadata comes from, no matter what the nature of that metadata is, that it is visible and accessible to the end consumer of the visualization. And then the publishing process often also deals with certification, which is, again, a much maligned area because it's an area where people just oversimplify, right? You may have initially in your organization just a very simple certification process. Content is either certified or not. But in large-scale enterprises, over time, you often find that you actually need a stratified layer of certification. It has to be more nuanced. You want to be able to distinguish between the item where it's been, say, gold certified, where you know that this piece of content is coming from a certified data source, that it's been certified by the business to use the right definitions, and that there are key governance aspects of like alerting and monitoring around that data to make sure that every day when that dashboard is published, it contains data that's correct. There's nothing that's out of bounds, right? That's one level of certification. That's a gold level certification. You want to distinguish between that and maybe just a level of certification where just a business analyst has checked that these numbers, generally match other reports that have also certified and is publishing it, right? And so whatever you decide to do in your business, whatever those definitions are for your organization, you need to have a certification process that's nuanced enough that can reflect those distinctions. So a consumer of this content can understand the difference between the different certification levels. The other thing that's important to always remember and understand in that whole governance flow is that this is never going to work as a fire and forget model, right? It's not going to be just, you can just set it and go away, go build everything else out and forget about it. You have to continuously go back and revisit things. So something might be perfectly set with metadata today and contain certified data and be just pristine. 6 months from now, a year from now, perhaps there's a new source of data that should be used. Perhaps there's some of the metadata that's changed, perhaps ownership or definitions of things have changed. And so you need a process by which there's either automated decertification and recertification, or what's more common is an attestation review process, where somebody comes in periodically and says, yes, I attest that this metadata is still accurate. And that should be triggered either by a lapsed time, where you say, oh, every year we're going to reattest certain content, or in some cases, maybe if for critical assets, if they've changed. So if you have a situation where that report, that highly important report that is being used by your CFO to post information to the street, well, if somebody's changed that report, then that should probably go through a re-review process to make sure that nothing has been broken that would cause it to either not be certified or any of the metadata to change. So both of those need to be supported in your process. So with all that, let me turn this over to Mike, and he can show you kind of how this really works within the product. What are the features and the capabilities that we put together to really support these goals?
Yeah, thanks, Marius. Let me just share our demo environment here. Okay, so there's a little bit of an assumption here that people on the presentation have seen some of Metric Insights in the past. We're going to be talking through some fairly detailed features here. But as most of you probably know, the first sort of stage in this process in setting up Metric Insights and setting up a portal is connecting to the key data sources in your environment. So this idea of synchronization of content from across different sources of BI in the organization, whatever those sources may be. And for those that have been using the platform to date, we've had this ability for a little while to turn on this concept of content synchronization from the underlying tools. So what you're looking at here is a demo environment of Metric Insights, where we have connectors set up, in this case, to a Tableau instance. And by turning on content synchronization, I'm able to synchronize what gets created in Tableau into a particular category within our portal. so that there's not this manual process that has to go on of pulling content into the portal as it gets created. And so what's happened historically is we'll go out, based on this connector, it's reading the metadata around what workbooks and worksheets are available within Tableau. And anytime something gets added or removed, it synchronizes that into categories within the portal. But, as Marius has been talking about, effectively, we probably don't want to do that at a global scale like that. All these workbooks and worksheets aren't necessarily candidates for end users to be looking at. And so that's where we want to introduce this idea of publishing workflows. So a publishing workflow, and this is the sort of editing screen for this, and I've opened a particular workflow here. A publishing workflow at its heart is a number of stages, as Marius spoke about, that a particular piece of content needs to go through. So you'll see in the middle of the screen here, I've got a workflow where content gets synchronized into the workflow where it's pending review. And in this case, it's a fairly involved one where I'm going to have the developer of that content carry out a number of steps and review it. I'm going to pass it over to the business owner who's going to give their input before it finally goes to the governance team to sign off on it before it gets chosen to be published and certified into the platform. And each of these stages, as Marius spoke about, if I just edit one of these, each of these stages, as well as requiring the person to review the content, may require them to carry out a particular action. So in this example, maybe the business owner that this gets assigned to at this stage is responsible for attaching documentation to the content, is responsible for setting the ownership of the content, is responsible for tagging it with certain items before it gets moved on to, in this case, the governance team, who may be responsible for setting the classification and whether it contains PII data or not. But ultimately, a workflow will be a number of stages, however simple or complex it needs to be. And then finally, it will get published once it's been through all those stages, typically with a level of certification based on the workflow that it's in. So in this case, it's going through a fairly large number of steps, which qualifies it as a gold certified piece of content when it gets published. So a workflow, again, can be as simple or as complex as it needs to be. We've implemented this ability to set up different workflows and associate different types of content with that workflow. In this case, a much more simple one. Maybe it's just a one-stage review before it gets bronze certified in this case. So step one is setting up these flows and then deciding as a team which types of content belong in which flow. And we've done some webinars in the past few months that have talked about sort of best practices around how you decide what level of scrutiny certain content needs to have. And I think we'll share some of those links when we send out this recording today. Now, we talked a little bit about sort of setting metadata as part of those workflows. And some of that metadata, as Marius spoke about, will flow through and be synchronized from tools that you have in place today. So, typically things like names or maybe descriptions will be coming from the BI tools, for example, that you connect to. Other things may be synchronized with your data catalogs. What we've implemented is this ability to really extend metadata to whatever level you need to through this concept of custom fields, which you can assign to content. And the custom field, if we look at, say, this PII data one here, is nothing more than something that you want to set for a particular piece of content. So in this case, fairly simple. Does this asset contain PII data or not? And what is the scope of this field? What content are we going to apply this to? And those custom fields can also drive behavior that you want with that content. So in this case, if we are tagging things that contain PII data, we may want to restrict the ability through the portal to say download or share or print that content. So we're driving an action off of what that particular field is trying to achieve. And then the final thing that we spoke about as part of the process is sort of this concept of tagging content, and for the purpose of both helping with search in the product, but also for the purpose of helping set context for what a particular asset is. And historically, we've had sort of this free-form tagging capability, which obviously still exists. So you can come in and just assign a tag to a sort of a hashtag to a particular piece of content. However, now we've introduced this idea of more sort of governed terms and definitions. And so what do we mean by that? Well, we can create sort of a predefined tag, for want of a better word, where maybe we're defining key metrics or dimensionality within the business. These definitions, such as cost here, how is it calculated? What's the description of it? And who is responsible for those definitions? You can set up these predefined tags and then again have these associated with the content that you're bringing in. And then the final thing is the certification of that content. So again, up till now, we've kind of had a binary piece of content is certified or not. Now there's the ability to introduce different certification levels. Again, that are specific to your organization. It could be something like we've been talking about, sort of a bronze, silver, gold. And the level of certification will have a definition with it that ties into how you're doing this governance process within your organization. So what does that look like from sort of a publisher perspective, or someone who's responsible for a particular stage within those workflows? Well, within the UI now, we have this idea of the content center, where as a publisher, I will get access to workflows that I'm involved with. And you'll see that this is sort of a board representation of the different stages, in this case, within that workflow process that was set up. And as we synchronize content into this workflow, it will come into this initial stage. And as a particular user, I'm going to be responsible for picking up certain content at certain stages. It will be assigned to me. So obviously I can go in and review that content, make sure it looks good, but also jump in and set any of the items of metadata that I'm responsible for. So in this case, as the developer, making sure the name description is right and that it looks good. As the business user, tagging it with the appropriate terms or attaching documentation and setting ownership to it. And as the data steward potentially, or the governance team, setting the classification and the sensitivity of the data that's in there. And as I'm responsible for each stage and I complete it, I will essentially save that and assign it to the next stage. It will move through before ultimately it gets this level of certification that we've applied to this workflow. And obviously the end result of all of this is that it will end up in a category within the portal, within the catalog, that is then available to users who have permissions to see that category. And as Marius said, what are we ultimately trying to achieve here? Well, if we publish a piece of content, we want to give the user all that information. So I now know that the sales analysis tile is gold certified, who did that certification, any descriptions, any glossary terms that are associated with it. I see that on the hover, I see it on the preview, I see it on the live piece of content, and I can drill into that metadata to really understand what's going on there, or even things like what other items contain similar terms, similar metrics in this case. So setting up those workflows, associating them with the content, making sure that bubbles through to the user so that they get the context of that before they drill into the content. The other piece that is obviously critical to this, as Marius spoke about, is it's not a fire and forget sort of model. If we've gone through this process with this sales analysis dashboard and it's ended up in the portal, we want to have an ongoing review around this. So typically within these workflows, there is going to be, I've just edited the one we're looking at here, there is going to be this level of automation around the review process that could be as simple as if something changes where we decertify the piece of content and put it back into that workflow at a particular stage that we were looking at, or where it has this sort of review stage as part of the flow. And that review stage can be triggered by a particular rule, if you like. So, this example, we publish a piece of content, it gets certified. Well, anything in this workflow on a monthly basis, we're going to look at what's in that published and certified state, and anything that's older than sort of 3 months, we're going to assign it to a review stage where a particular user is responsible or a user group is responsible for going and looking at that content and either saying, yeah, it's still okay, we're still good with it, or actually we need to make some changes here, we need to retire it, it's obsolete, whatever the decision is at that point. And not requiring the users who are responsible for that to have to be sort of looking at this all the time, using our alerting and distribution capabilities to sort of notify them when things are up for review. So conceivably, as a publisher of content, every month, get a list of things that are in my queue for review that I need to go back in and check off, or say, this is something that we should retire. So however it looks, I can get a list of things. I need to go and review this Tableau dashboard, this Power BI dashboard that looks like actually something is wrong with it, and I may need to go and sort that out, etc. So I can be alerted and not have to be continually thinking, okay, what do I need to be checking at this point in time? So let's stop sharing the demo and jump back to some more stuff in the slides here.
Thank you, Mike.
Bear with me 1 minute.
While Mike is doing that, just Mike showed a lot of the flow as to setting that in the workflow, but the key thing is to think about the fact that a lot of those attributes can also flow from the BI tools directly. They can be synced from your various metadata tools. Those governance definitions can be maintained in the product if we don't have them anywhere else. But if they do exist somewhere else, you can just bring them in. Yep. So next, we're going to talk about sort of the other parts of that cycle that we showed you, and I think feedback and monitoring are obviously the next things you want to look at after you publish content. Now, if you think about for a moment that example of the model of thinking of these BI assets as sort of works of art in a museum, if you were opened up a new exhibit in your museum, there's really two things you want to know after you open it up, right? You want to know, what's the foot traffic? I open up my Van Gogh exhibit. Are people flocking to come see it? Are we getting a lot of people in? So what kind of traffic am I getting? So what are people doing related to it? But then you also want to know, what are they saying, right? Are people coming to that and then afterwards going, oh boy, are they telling their friends, go see that Van Gogh exhibit, it's unbelievable, I was so inspired, I love it? Or are they saying, hey, you know what? These guys just put a bunch of doodles up there from when Van Gogh was in kindergarten. I can't believe they call that a Van Gogh exhibit. Right?
I still think they're probably quite valuable.
Maybe that would be more impressive. That's true. The point is that from their perspective, right? What are they? How compelling do they find that experience? And are they telling their colleagues that this is something they should do as well? Right. So those two together, those two pieces of the puzzle come together, and they paint a full picture of what the success looks like for you, and whether you're being successful or not, right? So the same thing, that's exactly what you want for your BI, right? You want to be able to, of course, understand your usage trends, but then you want to understand, what are people saying? So what does that mean, right? Feedback. We're collecting feedback. How do we do that successfully? Well, first of all, I think it's very important for that feedback to be high fidelity. What I mean by that is, oftentimes when people think about feedback, they think about like Amazon and the stars on it, right? Like, does this have 3 stars or 4 stars? What's the average stars that something has? And that kind of feedback mechanism, it's a lower fidelity feedback collection, and it's suitable for commodity items where really things are about the same. Two things, you're trying to compare things that are the same. You're trying to figure out, which is a little bit better, what do people like better, and then maybe you make a choice. So if I'm buying soap on Amazon and there's 2 bars, and one bar of soap, it costs about the same as the other, but one has a 4.3 rating with 1,000 people and the other has a 2.3 rating. Well, I'll go for the 4.3 rating because that's clearly something that people like better. But your visualizations are not bars of soap, right? They're not identical, largely identical to each other. They are largely different from each other. That's the whole point, right? So that kind of analysis is completely useless. What does it mean that I have 4 out of 5 stars for visualization? Is that good? Is that not good? What you want to know is, going back to the museum example, how likely are people to really do something, to go out and tell people, hey, go use this visualization? How useful is this visualization out there? And the gold standard to do that is NPS, right? That's been used in the industry for well over 2 decades as a measure of how useful people find content and how likely they are to recommend it to others. So a scoring mechanism like NPS with high fidelity is critical. Additionally, you need to be able to have not just the ratings, but the descriptive information. If I say that I'm 8 out of 10 likely to recommend this content, well, is that because I have issues with the data? Is it because what is keeping me from giving it a full score? If it's a low score, is it visualization's confusing? Is it the title? What is it about this, such that the consumer of this can communicate to the publisher the specific actions that might be helpful in making this content even more valuable. And then finally, the whole process needs to be non-intrusive, both to the publisher and to the consumer. So you can't count on the publisher going out and generating surveys. There's a reason why your analysts are not out there creating SurveyMonkey surveys every day. It's because they're really busy doing other things, right? So you can't have a really onerous process there. At the same time, you do not want to bombard your users with constant feedback requests. So it has to be something that is not obtrusive. It comes at them not infrequently, and collects feedback in a gentle way where they can give it to you without feeling like you're taking them out of the flow of their work. And so those are the principles that we've used in designing the feedback mechanism. When you look at the actual sort of foot traffic, right? How much are people using your content? Then there you want to look at a couple things. You want to look at your full life cycle usage. Again, recognizing that every asset you published is going to have an expiration date at some point. There's going to be some reason why the thing that was incredibly useful when it was published 2 years ago, the business has changed, the data has changed, something has rendered it now less useful, and it's time for retirement, right? So tracking it through the entire usage life cycle is key, and understanding how people are interacting with it across all the different touch points, whether it's in the portal, in the BI tool, over email because it's being distributed through mobile, whatever the form factor is, understanding it holistically. And then understanding not just the snapshot, not just, well, what's my 60-day usage on this, but understanding the trend, knowing, well, am I seeing that people are coming to this content and sticking around because they're coming back every day or every week because it's really sticky? Or is it an issue of like, I'm getting people to come and take a look at it, but they're really not coming back because there's not a lot of value? So all of these factors need to be built into the design around usage.
Okay, let's switch across again and take a look at some of that in the product. Share the screen here. So yeah, the two angles there that we're talking about, so feedback and monitoring. So let's start with the feedback aspect of it. So now there is the ability to create what we've referred to as feedback prompts, which if we go and edit this one here, this is kind of the example that Marius was talking. So a prompt obviously has typically a question and a description associated with it. You've got the option of just collecting sort of textual feedback or asking for a rating like Marius was talking about. and essentially then assigning that to certain types of content within the catalog that we put in place. And then, again, with the goal of sort of not overwhelming people asking for feedback all the time, you've got some control around how often you're going to prompt users to receive feedback for any content that's associated with this prompt. So again, you don't want to be asking multiple times a day, like we're in fact doing here, because we want it to pop up on the demo. But typically you're going to ask very infrequently and gain something that's actually valuable then in that case. So I set up the prompt, I associate it with content. And then ultimately, what does that mean? Well, if I'm looking at a particular report in the portal, now and again, I may be prompted with that to provide feedback. So as you'd imagine, I can come in, I can set my rating, I can add any additional feedback that I think would be useful to the creators of this particular report. And obviously, what are we doing with that? Well, we're capturing that information. So if I look at the details of the engagement then within a particular report, so I'm editing that tile, if you like, that was our Tableau sales analysis. We'll come and talk about this in a minute, but obviously we're capturing how often that particular workbook is being looked at in this case, and actually we see usage has kind of dropped off recently. But now we're also capturing that score and any feedback items that have been added to it. So in this case, scenario where we see usage dropping off alongside a fairly negative set of feedback, well, maybe this is a classic case where something has sort of run its life cycle and we should be retiring it because it's obsolete. And looking at the comments, it looks like something has replaced it now, so it's just cluttering up the environment. So capturing that sort of feedback and that rating gives one perspective on it. But again, if you just did that, then it doesn't really give you the full story. People may look at a piece of content, you ask for feedback, first time they look at it, they think, oh, this is great, I'm going to give it a 10, and then they never use it again. Well, that's only one side of the story, therefore you need to be tracking that usage as well. So within the content center that we were just looking at, we're now publishing more and more metrics into this environment. We continue to add to the screen in upcoming releases as well. But essentially behind the scenes, we're capturing all touch points that a particular piece of content gets. And that's obviously through the portal. For a lot of our plugins, that can be from the underlying tool itself. So someone access that workbook directly in Tableau, for example. It can be because they're consuming it through email and it's getting pushed out to them, or they're looking at it on their mobile device. Ultimately, we come up with a sort of engagement score over time for that content, so that, as Marius said, you can see what's most popular, what's increasing, what's going unused, what's decreasing. And then you can actually take that and take some action on it. So for stuff that is being unused, I want to, basically download that list and email people and recommend that they should be looking at it, or is it indeed obsolete and something that we should retire from the platform? And something we've had for a while, if you drill into this usage as well, you can get a fairly detailed view of sort of who is using that content over time. So these sort of views where the content is in the middle, users are coming in and accessing the content as we play this animation. These users are drifting to the outside are probably the ones that came in, gave it a 10, and then never came in again. The ones who are staying in the middle are there because they're looking at it every day, and clearly they're getting some use out of this. So usage combined with that feedback, we believe gives you sort of that complete picture around what should I do with a piece of content now that has been in the system a while. Is it still useful, or is it something that we should be retiring? Let's jump back to the slides for the final piece. Okay.
Okay, so some other we've talked a lot about governance here, but I want to just highlight a few one of the other key things that we're doing from a usability perspective, because one of the obviously a focus when you put content out on the portal, in addition to data literacy, in addition to governance, you want to make sure that it is as usable as possible to just drive as much engagement as possible. And one of the key innovations we've done in this area is global filters. So when we look at how users typically use visualizations, especially when they have multiple visualizations they have to use in the process. One of the challenges is that it's set context in one visualization as defined by a set of dropdowns. And so I'm looking at these particular dimension values, and then they go and okay, well, I need to now do some more analysis on this. If I go open up another visualization in another tool, even though those same filters are there, I have to go back and reset those and to the same context. So it takes me out of the flow of doing my analysis. It's cumbersome, and it just creates a whole kind of barrier to really doing in-depth analysis. And so one of the things we've done is added the ability to persist these filters in a session automatically across not only filters across the same BI tool, but even across multiple BI tools. So if I'm looking at a slice of looking at US data in my Tableau a dashboard, and I switch to Power BI, and that Power BI dashboard has a filter as well that has US as a dropdown. We automatically will just start you off with US as that setup. And the key, obviously, here to making this work is that it has to be easy to set up. So it's not something that users have to, content publishers have to think about. And it's something that users should be able to turn on or off, because you may find maybe you don't want that behavior, in which case you would just be able to opt out of it. But if you do, it should just happen automatically. So Mike will show you kind of how that works.
Yeah, I think what's key is so we've sort of had some of this capability today through our portal page experiences. So I know if there's some customers on the call, you've seen the ability to set that up. What we've done here is really allow you to do that for a session on as you log into the catalog. So regardless of whether you're looking at a bit of content through a tile, through a portal page, across that session, it's configurable for the user. So let's just jump across to that. All right, so what does that mean? Well, I guess to start, let's jump up here. So as Marius said, it is a user setting. So a user can decide that they want to remember filter selections across the session as they're navigating through this information. And so as I'm in the catalog or as I'm accessing content through portal pages, essentially when I come into a particular piece of content, and in this case it's Power BI where I have a channel and country filter, I can go in and be navigating through that content, setting filter values, slicing and dicing the data. If I come out of this content and I go into another piece of content, even if it's in a different tool like Tableau here, what we're doing behind the scenes is we're basically looking for common filter values across that, common filters and filter values across that content. So in this case, you'll see this Tableau dashboard actually has more filters than the two that were on the Power BI one, but it's recognized that channel and country existed in both. It's checking that the values for channel and country also exist in both, and if it does, it's applying it and pre-filtering it in that case. And there's a level in the setup of this, as obviously filters are called different things oftentimes in different tools and different reports even in the same tool. So there may be a technical name for the country filter in Power BI, which there often is as an example. There is a sort of aliasing capability when you set up the filters. We give it effectively what we call a display name. So what this is doing is saying, okay, any filter in any dashboard that has the same display name country, we're going to assume that that is the same filter. So it's kind of creating that country alias. And that's what we check for. And then we delve into the values and say, okay, does France exist in this case in that filter that's been associated with the content? So again, configurable at the user level. retains across, however I interact with that content within the session, so that I'm not having to reslice data as I go into it. So let's back to the slides to wrap up here. Okay.
Yeah. So the last point we just wanted to kind of bring up is, we're continuing to add in plugins or connectors to various sources. So as those of you that are customers on the line here know that we generally derive our plugin work is done based on customer demand, and these are various technologies that we've enabled. The one thing kind of interesting to mention here is that we're seeing a lot of uptake on SharePoint, right? Yeah, and so in particular, if you think about it, and this is both SharePoint and shared files, I've mentioned that we're seeing that people have a lot of assets there, and so we've enabled the ability not only to automatically synchronize that SharePoint or shared file system content in, but also to do things like bursting and distribution around that. So if you do want to send out, hey, I want to send out this particular spreadsheet that represents our financial model to the finance team once a week. We're now able to do that, enable full capability. We can preview images. We're really treating that almost as the same way that we would a BI tool from the user experience.
I think that's we're seeing a lot of that is the sort of document, spreadsheets, PowerPoints. It should be considered BI in your organization, and therefore whether it's on SharePoint, whether it's on the file stores, whether it's on wherever those documents are, you should be including that in the portal alongside your other things. All right, so I know we're coming up against time here. We've actually had some questions come in, but we're going to follow up on those post presentation. We've made a note of them. We'll put those in an email with some answers to the people who've asked them as we're out of time here. But thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. If there are any additional questions, feel free to send them out to either myself or Marius. The email address is there, and look out, those who did ask questions, look out for answers in the email when we send out the recording.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Bye.
Bye.